To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison and test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death.
This one's interesting, you know.
Yeah.
It's like a contrast to the first, especially with some of the other churches. I think, especially with the last one, you see a theme of like riches.
Riches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a theme of like subtle little bit of sort of traces of like wealth being in there. And I don't just mean like physical material, but the whole idea of like what wealth really is.
Yeah.
And if you notice, the two churches that do well, right? And it's funny, it's like when you're hearing these things and you hear, imagine you're one of these churches and you hear Jesus praise you.
Yeah.
Right. And then you hear, but I have this against you.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that like...
you know what, yeah? It's like a perfect model for correction.
Right, right.
And I think that if we do this more and follow Jesus' model for correction, I think we'll have a lot of success. Where you praise someone for something that they're doing well, whether it's like a friend, a spouse or anything, and then you slowly segue into, but you know...
this could be better.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I would like link back to what you were saying about the calling out.
Yeah.
If you had that same spirit of being tempered and calm and not looking with anger to pull someone down, rather look and say, they're different to me. Yeah. Different denomination, different belief, but this is what they do good.
Yeah.
They're not Pentecostals, but they do this really well. They focus on studying the Bible particularly. Their students really respect that about them, and I've learned so much from them. But I wish they understood a bit more about spiritual things.
Yeah.
Just what I mean? That attitude is always going to save you. Yeah. But also grow you, make you more mature. But I think this tracing of so there's three things, and the minute I mentioned this, it's the minute everyone who knows me is gonna be like, his favorite topic again. Yeah. But there's this trace of doing well, wealth, and suffering. Yeah. Yes. And it's like this, I want to preempt it by saying it's not that suffering means salvation. Yeah. It's not the same. But suffering is a symptom of salvation in some way. Yes. Right? You have to carry some cross. Definitely. And it's not like, you go through a tough time once or twice. Like throughout your life, there will be moments where you suffer greatly. And there are different measures, but it's required of you just to be a follower of Christ. Even Jesus learned obedience by the things he suffered. Yeah. And so how much more like us? Exactly. With suffering though, comes a humility. Yeah. That I feel like the minute you have comfort is the minute things are it's very easy for you to lose that love. Yeah. Whenever you've been in tough scenarios, you remember God the most. Yeah, 100%. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. When you're having things very comfortable, it's easy to chalk it up to your brilliance or you're doing well or your management or the things that you do well in life. It's very easy to attribute it to yourself. Yeah. But it's when you're going through tough times that you really develop a relationship. Yeah, definitely. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and I think it's because those tough times create a dependence on God or creates a dependence on something outside of yourself, which for us would be God, right? And so that dependence leads you into greater intimacy. But then the churches where they had the most problems, as we read on, if we get there, they were wealthy. Yeah. They were comfortable. They were happy. Absolutely. And because of that, it's easy to forget about God because you don't need him. And so sometimes that lack of something helps you to have the consciousness of depending on God. And we're not preaching to be poor, because that's me. It will never be me. Yeah. But the point being is that, I always think of it like a marriage. Do you know what I mean? Like the same way in which the church and Christ being married, the same way I look at my relationship with my wife. And I'm sure it's just something that you think as well. There's a sweetness that you can't really explain other than the fact that time has happened to you. Does that make sense? So the time that you spent with your wife, the time I've spent with my wife, there is something there that's not explainable that someone else will never be able to understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are jokes,
Mm-hmm.
there's pressures, there's a relationship, there's a leaning on each other that someone else cannot understand because they haven't suffered the same with you the way that they have.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, 100%.
There are times that I've gone through things with my wife and it's just been us. And we've been together for like 10 years now. Nobody can understand certain things about me, or I can speak to no one else about it but her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that only comes with a time that you spend with them. And it comes with a suffering or a pain or a struggle you go through together. Maybe it's about each other. Maybe it's externally.
Yeah.
But it's only through time and spend that time and suffering that relationship breaks, but then is molded together and is even stronger than before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Which I think is very similar to a lot of these churches.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to put the idea out that to be poor is to be saved.
Yeah, 100%.
That's not true.
Yeah.
But you also should know that it's harder for a rich man to get through an eye of a needle. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's a reality to it, and that's because of the comfort. And so there should be a reminder you have consistently to get yourself in moments. I'm not going to say to don't be one of those rich people that decide that they want to. You ever met them before? I don't know if you met or like seen them, where they almost have like a fetish for like going into impoverished areas and living like one of the people.
Yeah.
Especially when they go on holiday and they say they go help out somewhere, they go and do something, and they come back and they almost brag about it.
Yeah.
Peter does that, where he's like, "Look how many things we've sacrificed."
Yeah.
Right. And I think even later on in the verse, Jesus kind of
says to him that there's nothing you've sacrificed that you won't gain 10 times more when you get to heaven.
Exactly. So the whole point, Bible scholar. The whole point being is that there's a balance to it. The suffering is required for you to really have a relationship. Mm-hmm. It's necessary. Otherwise you wouldn't. It'd be too comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you can only have a serious relationship with people really when you go through a tough time. Yeah. That's when you know their character. Mm-hmm. That's when you know how if they're dependable or not. Yeah. You're only going to know if God's someone you can depend on until you need to depend on him. Yeah. Does that make sense? Definitely. And by virtue of being a human being, you will need a miracle at some point. You need 100%. The help at some point. Do you know what I mean? There's the balance to it where you don't want to be someone who consistently seeks to get into moments or positions where you want to present as if you're suffering or present as if you're going through a tough time. You're play acting. Yeah. Does that make sense?
So just also given some historical context with Smyrna, Smyrna was a place where it kept on being conquered. It had been conquered multiple times by multiple people.
Right.
Come to the point where it was completely destroyed, like it was inhabitable. And then Alexander the Great has a literal dream, not like a story, but a literal dream of rebuilding Smyrna. And so he does. And when he rebuilds it, they have these different communities that run it. And these different communities, let's say there's about 7 of them, they all have a particular idol or they all have a particular god that they worship. Now, the Christians didn't have one of those communities. Right. And so in order to trade and in order to make profit, in order to run businesses and so on, they had to get involved with one of the communities that engages in
like
idol worship.
Yeah. We have them in London.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of a guild, yeah.
Yeah, so because they didn't want to, they weren't able to trade and make money, which is why they ended up in poverty. And Jesus says to them, I know that though you are poor, you are rich spiritually.
I get you.
And so our natural circumstances, especially if we are in difficult natural circumstances because of the fear of the Lord and because of wanting to honor God, does not reflect our spiritual state. Right. You can be physically poor in the natural, but if you're physically poor because you've decided to sacrifice for Jesus and honor God, then you are spiritually rich. And so sometimes I think it's easy to look at your natural circumstances and judge yourself as not being successful. But I don't want to paint a picture of, oh, if you're not successful, it doesn't matter because you're spiritually rich. It's not as easy as that.
Of course.
It's if you have suffered for the sake of the name of Christ, and you have rejected riches and rejected, worldly pleasures for the sake of the name of Christ, then you earn a reward for it. Right. And I think that's something that we should take a lot of pleasure in as believers.
And celebrate.
100%, yeah.
All right, the third one, Pergamum. So Jesus says, Revelations 2, verses 12 to 17. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live. Hey, where Satan has his throne. Wow. Yet you remain true to my name. You do not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city, where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. It's that phrase again.
Mm-hmm.
There are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth.
It's crazy because when Jesus says that this is where Satan lives, it's literal in the sense that this is the most, this is the place populated with the most amount of idol worship temples.
Yeah.
And one of the temples in particular, when I studied about this, it's a snake temple.
Right.
And it has physical snakes there, and people would come there to get healing.
I see.
So they'll put them in a room filled with snakes, and somehow they'll come out healed. I don't know how that works, but it's obviously demonic energy bringing healing to people. Producing real results, otherwise no one would be going there.
Right.
These temples where the idol worship is going on and it's producing results for people, when Jesus is saying that you have accommodated and entertained the teachings of Balaam,
right,
we have to now go all the way back to Numbers.
Yeah.
So Balak, who was the king of Moab, hired Balaam, who was a prophet of God, to go and curse the children of Israel. Every time Balaam went to go and curse them, God would say to him, you cannot curse what I have blessed. And so when he tries to curse them, it will turn into a blessing.
Yeah.
So he went back to Balak, and Balak said, I know what you want. You want more money, isn't it? Okay, don't worry. Here's some more money. Just go and curse them. Right. So he negotiated. Yeah. And Balaam's like, no, it's not about the money. I just can't I just can't curse them. But then he came up with a plan and he said, you know what? Here's the plan. If you send beautiful Moabite women into their camp and the women entice the men to sin and commit sexual immorality, I won't even need to curse them. Because the hand of God upon their nation will be lifted because of the immorality. And then whatever you want to accomplish will be able to be accomplished.
Right.
So that is the teaching of Balaam, is to entice people into sin for the sake of some type of natural gain. And so what was happening here is that people, because of the idol worship and everything, and again, similar to the previous churches, they needed to engage in it in some way to make money, right? Yeah. In the same way you have to engage with the natural world now to make money. Imagine if every single job option that you had, there was some type of idol worship attached to it. You would now be suffering if you decided that you weren't going to engage in it.
Right.
So what happened was some people started to teach that for the sake of survival, it's okay to engage in the idol worship and engage in the sinful practices as long as your heart is not in it.
Yeah.
So today it could look like some type of maybe excessive grace message that says that you can do whatever you want and it's fine because God knows your heart. That's what was happening here. And that was the rebuke that Jesus had against them. And it's funny because I want to be careful how I say this, but when I first came to Christ, there were struggles that I had, but there were preachers that I could listen to that would make me feel like it's okay to go and engage in the sin.
Right, to soothe you.
And it's crazy because I could be feeling bad and feeling guilty, but I know, okay, if I listen to this preacher, I'll feel fine to go ahead and go and sin. Isn't that mad?
Crazy.
And that's literally what I'll do. And it's not necessarily always the preacher's fault. Sometimes we also can distort messages, manipulate messages in our minds because we want to do, or seek it out. And so it's not like you blame externally. The blame is always internal.
100%.
But what I say that to say that there is a way that scripture can be twisted that can make you feel okay in sin.
Yeah.
But even if it's unto death, God wants us to suffer for his sake.
It's that theme again of money.
Yes.
Mammon is strong. And you've always heard me say this. Like we'll have discussions about politics privately and the world in general. And I'd always say to you, the number one issue we're facing out of anything else is mammon.
Definitely.
It's always mammon. If you want to find out what's wrong, get to the heart of it. It's going to be a insatiable thirst for greed or wanting more control or authority over people.
Yeah.
Either through money or just control. Those are the two main things.
Definitely.
And it's shocking how much as Christians we don't recognize it driving our lives. Do you know what I mean?
Jesus said that you cannot serve God and money. And it's so wild because he didn't
said
say you can't serve God and Satan.
Right.
He said you can't serve God and money.
Exactly.
And so the only other thing in our lives that can elevate itself to the point of desiring our worship is money.
Right.
And a lot of the time we give into it unconsciously.
Worship really is just what you give your attention to.
Yeah.
So in the old days, it's easy to have a physical expression of that worship, burning incense at the altar before you enter the temple of Artemis, or engaging in some sort of sexual immorality, or doing something in a temple. There was always a physical way to express that worship.
Yeah.
Where today, there's not so much of a religious influence on society at large. It's quite largely secular, especially in the Western world.
Yeah.
So we think that it's different, but it's not. Because worship just really means what you attend to, what you give your attention to. And so the minute that the shift comes from looking at God and Jesus and focusing on him to another thing is the minute that worship is happening, but you don't know it. It's much more subtle. Lucifer, it's when his eyes focus on his beauty that pride or iniquity was found in him.
Wow. Yeah.
Does that make sense? So the minute your attention shifts and your focus is consistently on this thing rather than on him, then you know worship is happening.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a physical expression or it's a lack of renewing of the mind.